Story 1. What's more interesting is that these individuals may crawl or creep up, but hardly accelerate enough to match the energy they were showing before it turned green. Story 2. You got me. I was a postal worker and had to take an actual federal driving course. The man who instructed us had a pet peeve. He would go on for 20 minutes about how foolish it was and how a car accident could become chaotic. To this day, I pull up close enough to see the spot where their rear tire touches the road and no closer. Thank you, Mr. Metzner. Story 3. I am creating space behind me for people to enter the turn lane. The person in front of me is creeping, leaving a large gap, while I remain stationary. Story 4. Impatient for the light to change and hoping the movement will activate the sensor under the car. Story 5. Because I'm trying to safely turn right on red, the driver to my left, who can't go until the light turns green, keeps creeping forward and blocking my view. Story 6. I used to have a car with an antifreeze leak, and the engine often produced steam. I would get close to the car in front of me at traffic lights to make it seem like the exhaust was coming from the other vehicle. Story 7. Sometimes it's because there is too much of a gap, so there might not be enough room for a car behind me if we are in a turning lane. Story 8. My boyfriend does this, and it drives me crazy and stresses me out. He says it's because he's impatient. I'm like, that's not going to change the light green any faster. I almost always yell at him to stop. I'm usually the one who drives, but I was without a vehicle for a while. Before anyone asks why I didn't just drive, I couldn't wait to get back into a vehicle of my own. Story 9. Boomer habit. Old school drivers who learned from someone who said, "You always have to be ready to go." Story 10. I believe it is related to an issue with the wiring of their nervous system. They tend to hesitate when the light actually turns green. Story 11. I pretend to accelerate slightly for the cars next to me on their phones who think it's time to go without looking up. I haven't caused an accident yet, but I'm improving. Story 12. My favorite moment is when a car speeds around others, tailgating, only to end up at the same red light as I do. Story 13. My car shakes severely whenever it stops at a red light or stop sign, so I sometimes take measures to prevent it. Story 14. It's not about getting there faster. It's about feeling like I'm doing something. Sitting still at a red light makes me feel like a caged animal. Let me creep forward in peace. I'm not hurting anyone except the person behind me who thought I was actually going. That's on them. Story 15. It's light out and away we go. Hamilton gets off to a good start, but it seems like Lando has jumped the start. We will have to wait and see what the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile says. Story 16. In the past, it was essential to check if the car was still in gear to ensure you wouldn't stall. Anyone doing this in an automatic vehicle is simply unusual. Story 17. I occasionally do it. Mostly, if the person ahead of me creeps forward, I will likely creep forward a little. I am somewhat obsessed with efficient traffic flow, and sometimes it clears up space for people to enter a turn lane. Conversely, I do not understand why people leave a large gap in front of them. That is unwise. Story 18. Some red lights have sensors that turn green when they detect a car. If I have been sitting for a while, it is possible that I did not trigger the sensor. I might move a little to see if I can activate it. I have been doing this for so long and have many anecdotes of immediate changes after creeping that at this point, you cannot convince me otherwise. I know a pattern when I see one. Story 19. Large trucks and SUVs that stop in the crosswalk prevent making a right turn on red. Story 20. You don't want to come to a stop too close to the car in front of you in case the car behind doesn't stop and hits you. Once they stop, you can close the gap so you aren't blocking traffic leading to a turning lane. Story 21. I'm hoping that by doing so, the person in front of me will realize he doesn't need 5 car lengths between him and the vehicle in front of him. In this way, maybe more than 3 cars will get through the light. Story 22. Some streets have visible sensors in the pavement at the traffic lights. I have noticed a few that do not change unless there are at least 4 or 5 cars waiting to make a left turn. Some people stop short to trick the light into changing. Story 23. Sometimes I don't realize how much space is still in front of me until I stop. Sometimes I can't see past the car on my left, and I'm trying to inch forward enough to see so I can turn right at the red light. Story 24. If it is taking a while, they might think that they are not parked far enough to trigger the light switching sensors. Story 25. They believe they are timing the green light, but they missed it. So they attempted again to avoid embarrassment, but that does not work either. They continue trying until the light turns green to make it appear intentional. Story 26. I like to see if the person behind me will move. I stop and then move again, watching and repeating. Call me chaotic neutral. Story 27. It's the radio. Often, when I stop at a red light, my radio partially loses the signal, and if I move a few feet, it comes back. Multipath interference is at work. Story 28. I was taught in driver's education to initially stop with a significant amount of space in front of me. This allows for an escape route if someone is about to rear-end me. At the very least, if I am rear-ended, I won't collide with the car in front of me. As cars line up behind me and I am no longer at risk of being rear-ended, I can move forward and close that space. Mind you, this isn't a piece of advice I consistently follow, but it serves as a potential explanation. Story 29. Because the person behind me decided to stop 1 inch away from my bumper. The worst part is that when I move up to create some space, they move closer. Story 30. Honestly, it's probably because my baby is crying, and the motion of the car helps calm him. I look like a complete fool, though. Parenthood. Story 31. Automatics. Taking your foot off the brake moves you forward. I still drive a manual transmission, and moving forward actually requires using the clutch and shifting gears. It is noticeable when all of the inching turns to feet in front of me. Story 32. Posturing. I'm going to go. I promise you. I'm going to go right now. Scoots forward, no, right? Scoots now. Scoots into the crosswalk, then looks at phone. Misses the light, gestures angrily at someone. I promise you, I'm going to go right now. Story 33. No. The worst are those who don't know how to adjust their speed on the freeway by easing off the gas. They are constantly braking. Story 34. I only do this when I can see that there is not enough room for someone behind me to get into the turn lane. I know how frustrating it can be to make a turn if just one car in front moved up a couple of feet. Story 35. Many people find it frustrating to sit still. Doing something is better than doing nothing. This is a common human trait. Story 36. I take the same work route on a tourist attraction street with many stoplights. I know the pattern for them all, and if I am first in line, I try to make it through the next one I know will turn red. Story 37. To the people who lurch forward 2 full seconds after the light turns green, and then suddenly brake shortly after entering the intersection. Why? Story 38. Oh my gosh, I dislike it greatly when people do this. It creates an irrational fear that they will suddenly move forward at a red light and potentially get into a crash. Story 39. Because they want to hit the car in front of them despite the light still being red, or was that just my luck today? Story 40. My favorite is when the light change is delayed, and the minivan keeps creeping, almost reaching the middle of the intersection before the light turns green. Story 41. I like the ones that have crept out so far that they have basically already run the red light and can no longer see their own light turn green. Story 42. Most of the time, it's because the car behind me is speeding, and it's stressing me out that they aren't going to stop in time. Story 43. I have asked that question for decades. It also creates a domino effect, causing everyone else in line to do the same. Story 44. I generally only do it when someone behind me gets too close. The space allows me time to react if they start accelerating. Story 45. My boyfriend's car has reached a point where it idles roughly when the heater or air conditioning is on, but it runs smoothly when the engine is engaged and moving forward. This way, I don't feel like I'm breaking down while driving. Usually, I just roll the windows down and turn off the air conditioning. Story 46. I stop more than a car length back, as taught in driver education. Then, I creep up as traffic builds behind me, giving myself room to escape if conditions worsen or if the first car behind me cannot stop. I close the distance when I feel safer. These are principles learned in defensive driving, but it seems like everyone else is just improvising. Story 47. Usually, it's because I plan to turn right on red, and I cannot see the oncoming traffic to determine if it is safe to proceed. Story 48. That's what the Department of Motor Vehicles tells you to do. Stop early and creep. I do it on my bike to keep my feet off the ground. Story 49. I was behind a car recently that was in the middle of the intersection when the light turned green. Story 50. They are not fully paying attention to the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. Your brain registers movement and reacts before it can register specific details about that movement, which is helpful if you're trying to ward off predators but not very useful for driving. These individuals are anticipating the green light. They see nearby cars moving, so they release the brake before realizing that the moving cars are turning left. Story 51. I love when a car behind me does this. I creep forward and they do the same. I did it 5 times to a guy yesterday, and I think he got the idea and stopped. It was funny. Story 52. I love the idea that if I move my car 9 times out of 10, the person behind me will move too. It makes me chuckle to myself. Story 53. Some lights are timed, while others are activated by sensors. I waited 5 minutes at a light, got annoyed, crept forward, backed up, and then it turned green. Story 54. This also wears out your brakes much faster as you are stopping multiple times, although from a much slower speed, but it does add up over time. Story 55. I was in the passenger seat and asked my friend, who was driving, why he did it. He said, I think it's funny watching all the people behind me creep forward just because I did. Story 56. It is usually because I am tired of holding the brakes on my bike, so I let go, move forward about 5 centimeters, and hold it again. Story 57. An infant in the car dislikes when the vehicle stops and starts screaming. Red lights are a nightmare with our little one, who literally screams until he is completely out of breath. To manage the situation, we try to make small adjustments to get through the stop. As soon as we move again, he is fine. Story 58. Don't get me started on people who don't know how to merge. They act as if it's a race and refuse to let you in. Just because you're not in the merge lane doesn't mean you automatically get to be the line leader. Go back to kindergarten. Story 59. In some places, the sensor for the light is buried in the ground. They are probably trying to activate it. The debate about whether this works continues in my area. Story 60. Where I live, some lights are motion censored during certain hours. If they don't detect a car, it's a longer wait for green. For example, it might be 1 minute instead of 30 seconds, depending on the cycle. When the system detects a car, the light follows a normal cycle to green. I'm not sure where the detection zone is, so I move slowly if I stop well before the white line. Outside my city, I don't do this. Story 61. My pet peeve is when I'm trying to make a right turn on red, and the person in the left lane obstructs my view. Now I can't see the cars coming, and I can't make the turn. Story 62. Sometimes I want to make sure I don't stall, and that I'm holding the clutch correctly, so I can take off quickly, especially on hills. Other times I don't feel the need to, but mostly it's because I'm bored waiting. Story 63. Sometimes you may not be close enough to the line for the sensors to change the light. Story 64. I don't feel creepy, but sometimes when I drive late at night and approach a junction, I move forward and back on the lane sensors to trigger the turn arrows or the lights to change in my favor more quickly. Story 65. I have seen people intentionally stop well short of the line to make space for their unusual creeping fetish. Story 66. The people who annoy me are those who stop so far back that 2 cars could fit in the gap. If they moved up to a normal distance from the car in front of them, we could finally reach the turning lane. Just pull up already and stop looking at your phone. Story 67. Or the people who have to stand with their toes on the edge of the sidewalk waiting for the crosswalk sign to change, as if their position has any bearing on when the light changes. Why are you leaning into traffic, hoping to change a light so you can walk? I used to drive a concrete pump, a huge truck, downtown and would pass within inches of these people's faces as they stood at the edge of the sidewalk. Yet they don't even flinch. They're so fixated on the little crosswalk figure lighting up that they don't realize they're risking their lives. Step back a few feet. You'll be okay. The little man will still light up for you. Story 68. Sometimes it is necessary to move your car to activate the in-ground sensors responsible for changing the lights. Story 69. I only do it when I can see that the lights have clearly skipped my turn and I am up front. There is a sensor that detects if cars are waiting for the light, and if you do not move up all the way, it might think you are not there. Story 70. I do this at most lights. Why? Ask a mechanic how brake rotors get warped. Heat from the brake pad transfers to the brake rotor after a stop, softening that area as it repeatedly lands on it. I roll forward about 6 to 8 inches twice to help even out the heat dissipation into the rotor. If it's a long panic stop from high speed, I try to put the vehicle in neutral and take my foot completely off the brake pedal. This isn't always possible on a slight incline, so rolling forward is the next best option. Now you know. Story 71. In my area, there are multiple sensors under the pavement just before the traffic light. If you stop over the sensor 6 feet back from the stoplight, roll forward 2 feet, and stop again, the lights are programmed to change immediately. This feature was installed to help police get through the lights more quickly. Story 72. I have a theory that many people struggle to maintain their ankle at an angle for a while, similar to when individuals attempt to sustain freeway speeds of 60 miles per hour but end up lightly pressing the accelerator due to weak ankles. The same goes for their attention while driving. Story 73. For the same reason that people press the elevator button multiple times, it gives you the feeling that you are taking action to speed things up, even if you are not actually doing anything. Story 74. I'm an individual who still listens to the radio. If I do this, it's because there's too much interference at my initial location. Story 75. Where I grew up, there were detection plates under the road before intersections. Sometimes, if you moved forward a little, they would immediately turn green. If I'm not first, I don't do it, though. Story 76. I do it out of respect for the people behind me. Giving them space provides them with more freedom of action. Being open can have a positive impact on those who follow. Story 77. I sometimes do that to ensure I have triggered the light sensor. I was stuck for 5 minutes once behind a driver who stopped just short of the intersection and did not trigger the sensor. We eventually drove around him, triggered the sensor to get a green light, and left him far behind. Story 78. Trying to re-trigger the large wire loop sensor embedded in the road so that it registers more vehicles and decreases the wait time for the traffic light. Story 79. As a pedestrian, this is scary. I will be in the crosswalk and all of a sudden the car starts moving forward. Story 80. I do it to trigger the red lights in my area. They specifically have rectangles in the front 4 spots or 2 spots, and if you are on them and move, it will switch the light. Other people just sit there forever and wait. I don't want to wait. Story 81. This is a pet peeve of mine. It's not hard to pull up as intended and sit there without moving until the signal changes. I see many older individuals do it. Either they lack the strength to hold their foot like that for long, or there is some kind of psychological issue. In either case, they shouldn't be driving. You can keep creeping, but I'm not moving until the signal changes. Story 82. Actually, I do it if someone is on their phone next to me. It shocks them back to reality. Sometimes I get their attention 3 or 4 times. Story 83. Why indeed? Put your foot on the brake and hold it there until the light is green, you impatient person. Story 84. They want a head start on the green light or they aren't really paying attention. Either way, watch out. You don't want to be in front of them. Story 85. Many lights have a sensor to trigger green signals. If your vehicle doesn't activate it, the light stays red for an extended period. So, creep forward if you don't think you're far enough. Interestingly, motorcycles lack the weight to activate the sensor. Story 86. Sometimes my car's magnetism doesn't detect the traffic light's ground level of those circular metals. I don't want to wait through another red cycle. Story 87. Where I live, we have pressure sensors at red lights. When you move forward, especially during rush hour with many cars waiting in line, it triggers a light change. Story 88. I sometimes do this to let the traffic signal know I am there. Many traffic signals have loops of wire in the pavement that detect metal, which interrupts the electric signal to the traffic light. This triggers a countdown on many systems that reduces the wait time, depending on how it is set up and the amount of traffic. Not all traffic signals are like this, and the loops in the pavement are not always visible, so I probably also do it when it doesn't have any effect. Story 89. In my head, they are largely doing this to get there sooner as an unconscious impulse. I have actually started doing it a bit if the space in front of me opens up significantly, like 1/3 of a car length, in case there is someone behind us who needs to turn across traffic, and the additional space will be used to facilitate that. The weirder part is, why do people not just pull into the space they feel comfortable with right away? What are they thinking when they stop a car length from the vehicle in front and then start creeping? Story 90. For some reason, I delude myself into thinking that the traffic light will change more quickly if I creep closer to the intersection. I have to do it slowly and in small increments so the traffic light doesn't catch me trying to pressure it. Story 91. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If I lose focus for just a moment, I will start reading about earthworms for 3 hours in the right lane. Not even a honk would disturb my hyperfocus. Story 92. Which type of creeping? I edge towards the line and sometimes, when safe, roll back a little to trigger the sensor. To the people who just start moving until they clear the crosswalk while it's still red, impatient individuals. Story 93. I did this during a time when my car had issues and would shut off when I applied the brakes. It made me feel like it would cause my car to fail. Story 94. I drive a manual car, so I often feel bored, and my leg needs a break. Sometimes traffic lights can be selective about when they change, so if I'm in a new area and the pedestrian signal is still green when I think it should have changed, it can be frustrating. Story 95. I never did it when I drove a standard. Only when I bought my automatic did I join that crowd. Please don't call us that. I don't want to be a part of it. Story 96. Honestly, I think some people believe they are summoning the green light through sheer determination. Inch forward, wait, inch again. Maybe the traffic gods will notice. Story 97. Last time this question was asked, someone claimed it was better for the car and that I was damaging my car by stopping completely at every traffic light. Story 98. I also pull into the intersection instead of waiting at the line. Driving in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore gave me bad habits. Story 99. I just hate when they're next to me and they creep forward. I get an instant shock thinking I'm rolling backward. Story 100. I occasionally drive, but not for reasons that others might consider. I have anxiety and try to be considerate in traffic. I constantly worry about occupying too much of the lane while also being concerned that others are not leaving enough space between us, especially at a red light before a turn. Story 101. Even more annoying are people who start to move forward when the light turns green and then immediately take their foot off the accelerator and slow to a crawl. Why? Are you afraid the light might just be bluffing? Story 102. Once upon a time, and maybe still in some places, there were eye sensors on the poles. Triggering these sensors would change the traffic light faster, as the system would detect more cars waiting, or it might re-trigger the sensor for a quicker change. Sometimes it seemed to work, and sometimes it did not. Perhaps the light was going to change anyway, making it appear effective. I have no idea if it actually worked or not. Story 103. Because they don't know to watch the traffic signal for amber or what the green sequence will be when it switches directions, they may panic when the person behind them honks their horn after having to sit there a brief moment after it turns green. They have been sitting there with the brake and the accelerator pressed, wondering why they are waiting when the light is green. Story 104. I only do that if I am almost certain the light is about to turn green. The people who continually creep forward 10 seconds after the light changes look foolish to me, especially if I am the first in line at the light. Story 105. One of my friends plays a game to see how many times he can get the car behind him to move up as well. Story 106. My air conditioning cuts out when I stop for more than a few seconds. So, when it's extremely hot outside, I have to take my foot off the brake to make the air conditioning restart. Story 107. This especially inching towards someone in the crosswalk just to make their important right turn. Story 108. It's so frustrating. In my town, we keep getting people creeping so far forward that they might as well just run the red light and get it over with. Story 109. If your foot is on the brake just enough to stop the car and the air conditioning compressor cycles on, the RPMs will raise slightly enough to pull the car forward until you press harder. Other than that, they are probably just impatient. Story 110. This behavior drives me insane, even more than people who have no idea what a shoulder check is. It's a red light. Have some patience for 30 seconds. Story 111. It should be like a march, all in step, everyone gasping at the same time. It should resemble a Blue Angels formation. Story 112. I was in a serious accident while coming to a stop when my car was hit by several vehicles ahead of me. Now I stop a little over one car length back, which I know is too far, but that way if I get hit, I won't hit the person in front of me. Once the car behind me has stopped, I will roll forward to a more reasonable distance. Story 113. I have been informed that sometimes intersections are sensitive to the weight or presence of a vehicle, which can trigger the stoplight to change from red to green. Story 114. The lights are typically triggered by a sensor. By inching forward, you ensure that you have activated the system to allow you your turn to proceed. Story 115. My girlfriend thinks that at a red light, she needs to be 2 car lengths from the other car, and I die a little inside every time. Story 116. I do it to activate the sensor in the road that informs the traffic signals that cars are present, prompting them to change colors. However, I may have been misinformed and genuinely want to believe that this sensor is real, so I continue to move forward. It's a habit I don't think I will break because it makes me feel good when it responds to my color. Story 117. I apologize, my car has an automatic engine shutoff, and I am just trying to restart my engine, so I am ready to go when the light turns green. Story 118. I am a truck driver. The truck will automatically shut off after a certain period of time if it is idling. If you creep forward slightly, it will not shut off. There is a button to avoid the shutoff, but it is not in an obvious place and may be difficult to find if you don't use it often. I usually do not pull up too far at the light and do not move it much at all. Story 119. I have always assumed the need to be doing something, like moving forward or making progress, with a degree of impatience. My reasoning is that I do not possess these traits, and I am completely content to stay still until the time is right. Story 120. At the line, there are sensors that detect traffic. I'm not sure what that looks like behind someone. Story 121. I'm just blocking the slip lane that allows the drivers to make a right turn, so I creep up a bit. The vehicle ahead of me pulled up, and now there's a gap large enough to fit the entire Roman Empire between me and the car in front. There's a truck behind me and it's very close. My foot slipped off the brake. Story 122. Driver's education taught me to stay back from the vehicle in front of me, at least 3 car lengths. As another car approaches from behind, I can decide whether it is going to stop and I should remain, or if I need to move up further if they brake too late or move out of the way if they do not brake at all. I watch for a couple of cars to get behind me, and then I move up to where I can see the tires touch the road of the car in front of me. Story 123. I don't know. The acceleration at the green light feels smoother if I'm already rolling a little. I like to keep a little momentum going. It's just more comfortable and it has become a habit. Story 124. I had an old manager who believed that flashing your lights at a red light would trick the system into thinking you were an emergency vehicle, causing the light to change more quickly. I am unsure if that is true. Story 125. Some traffic lights have sensors in the road. If you are too far back, the light does not detect any vehicles waiting, so it does not change. I believe most people are just impatient and want to ensure they trigger the sensor. Story 126. I like to see how many times I can get the person behind me to inch forward before they catch on. Story 127. The interesting thing I've noticed when they are in the lane next to me is that they creep up, then stop. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there waiting for the green light, and I beat them off the line every single time. Story 128. So far past the stop line that they can't see the light change, the person behind them has to roll up and sometimes beep to get them to go. Story 129. A 67-year-old man observed that some older traffic lights operate using pressure plates embedded in the pavement. When an object rests on the plate, it activates a switch. The system waits for a certain number of vehicles to pass, and once it detects enough, the light changes. My Hummer has a flat windshield, and one set of traffic lights has a small sensor mounted next to it. This type of sensor can detect light, such as that from emergency vehicles like police cars or ambulances with flashing lights, and change the traffic signal accordingly. We studied traffic lights in college. Story 130. If I am in front, I try to ensure I am on the sensor. If I am behind someone, I usually realize I am too far away because my depth perception is poor. Story 131. I wish I lived in a world where, once the light turns green, everyone releases their brake and moves forward. Seeing the slow line of brake lights dimming is just annoying to me. And yes, I can be slow to react at traffic lights at times. Story 132. It reminds me of that moment just before the roller coaster tips over, and you fall endlessly down. Story 133. I am closer to my destination, of course. I save miles and hours every year by avoiding red lights. Story 134. Multiple people in this thread are saying, I want the person next to me to stop looking at their phone. This is the opposite reason I do it. Why are you looking in my window when we're completely stopped? No, I'm not on my phone, but if someone pulls up right next to me and our windows are perfectly lined up, I assume they're being intrusive and I want to inch away from them. I do have severe social anxiety, which probably contributes to this paranoid and absurd line of thought at the stoplight. Story 135. I only do it if I think it might clear a car from the intersection behind me. Otherwise, it makes no sense to use my brakes twice when once will do. Story 136. So that they can get too far forward and not be able to see when the light turns green, thus slowing the acceleration of the stream of cars waiting to move behind them. Story 137. If I am in a turn lane, my car is small. Most people where I live do not drive small cars. I cannot see oncoming traffic through the engine bay. If cars are creeping forward, I may have to go farther. In a straight lane, if someone in front of me moves, I do not creep forward when I am in front, especially in a turn lane situation. Story 138. I will slow down if I think my brakes might be hot to prevent uneven pad deposition on the rotor. That is typically what causes the warped brake shake. I also let off the gas and might brake early, trying to stay in motion while waiting for the light to change. This saves fuel and reduces brake wear. Story 139. I challenge myself to avoid coming to a complete stop while driving. Once I have no choice but to stop, the game ends. Story 140. I usually stop behind the line, but some of the traffic lights have line activation and don't turn green unless you're almost on top of it. It's just become a habit if I'm sitting for more than a minute. Story 141. I can't say this is for everyone, but when I drive, usually a manual in my country, I do it because I have a poor feel for when to release the clutch. I give it little tests to make sure I have it right. It's better than making mistakes and not being able to move, I suppose. Story 142. Resting one's foot in an automatic vehicle by relieving pressure on the brake. In an automatic transmission, you must maintain a small amount of pressure on the brake pedal. Otherwise, the car will move forward. Sometimes you can relieve the discomfort in your ankle by momentarily easing the pressure. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.